for not paying rent. Housing's a human right.
He doesn't know what I know.
So why does everyone hate landlords?
If you decide to become a landlord in 2022 America, where there's a recession, where every corporation is laying off workers left and right, where sick people have to rely on GoFundMes and a good personality to be able to afford life-saving surgery, where a full-time minimum wage job doesn't even afford you a studio apartment anymore, you're smoking crack if you think that you didn't sign up for having to house some struggling people who are trying to get back on their feet. I couldn't imagine being a landlord right now complaining about freeloaders while my full-time job consists of literally waiting for 10 people to each hand me a check for $2,000, totaling $20,000 a month. Like, imagine being like, everybody wants handouts these days, it's crazy, but then like 100% of your income consists of 60% of 10 other people's income.
So this TikTok by Legitimate Hermit points out that landlords make all of their income off of other people's money. And now, of course, there's going to be a bunch of landlords that come in and say, but we provide housing. But they don't really. Landlords do not provide housing. Developers build buildings. Building managers actually do all of the management of the building. That really, it's the property managers that do all the work. Now, sometimes the landlord is their own property manager and they have to some degree a real job. But ultimately, the core essence of landlording is in simply the owning of buildings and the reaping of profits as the result of you happening to have more money before other people had that money. And this is why not only do people on the left, generally speaking, despise landlord, figures like Marx and Lenin and Mao and whatnot, but also capitalists like Adam Smith, the father of capitalism, saw rent extraction as something that provided absolutely no benefit to the economy whatsoever, actually causing extreme hindrances to the market overall by extracting wealth from the circulating market, really for no purpose and towards no productive end, which really speaks to how unproductive the entire enterprise of landlording really is. But then when you look at the material reality of landlording, you see it gets even worse because the incentive is actually very, very clear. The incentive for every landlord that they all share is to make the cost of living higher. The higher the cost of living is, the more profits landlords get. And this is why the cost of housing is actually inflating at far higher rate than basically anything else. The reality is that the companies that profit off of basic necessities are the ones that tend to see the highest inflation, not because inflation is impacting those industries, but because that is where inflation comes from. It is those industries, especially landlords, that actively create inflation. The increased costs are really just the result of a desire for increased profits. And on top of that, landlords have even expanded into buying single-family homes to the point where the available options for people who want to buy a home is shrinking precipitously, so that more and more people are being forced to rent. But as more people are forced to rent, and as these giant investment companies dump all their money into becoming wealthy landlords, well then what you have is a market that is saturated with landlords who can cooperate with each other to set market rates much higher so that they can get huge profit margins, while regular working class folks are left with very, very little money to spend on basically anything other than housing. And this is exactly why even the OG theorists of capitalism said that rent extraction fundamentally was harmful to the economy, because when you start to get to the point where you have monopolies or cartels, then all of a sudden you're at the point where they can pretty much charge whatever they want, because most people would give a pretty decent chunk of their income just to not be homeless. And they are banking on that, quite literally. But that's not enough for landlords, you see. Not only do they want to make a ton of your money without putting in any work themselves, they also want to make sure that their system is protected. And because we live in a capitalist system where our elected officials really just work for large corporations, we're in a position where our government, for the most part, puts its thumb on the scale to the benefit of the landlords at the expense of the tenants. In most states, if you're going through eviction court, the entire process is deeply biased towards the landlords because, and I know this is really wild, a lot of judges themselves are landlords, and a lot of lawyers themselves are also landlords. It turns out anybody that gets like a really decent salary will tend to try and turn around and put as much money as they can into landlording. I think for obvious reasons. People are all about getting that passive income. But what passive income really means is other people's income. And so basically, all of the people that run in those circles tend to be deeply biased in favor of landlord. And then on top of that, you have the reality that if you're being evicted, you don't have the same legal rights that you would have if you were being charged with a crime. You don't necessarily have a right to a lawyer. You don't even necessarily have a right to like a trial or a jury or anything like that. It really will just be sometimes your landlord, or more frequently, lawyers representing your landlord, against you, an individual. And very often, judges will pretty much not listen to anything you have to say. Which is why there's so many stories across this country of landlords invading the privacy of their tenants, sexually harassing and sometimes sexually assaulting their tenants, or engaging in one of a litany of other exploitative or harmful things that they could do to their tenants. And one of the things that maintains this reality is the fact that because landlords don't actually have to earn a living, they don't actually have to go to work to earn anything, they end up having, by and large, a lot of free time. And they use that free time to lobby the government, to pay lobbyists for them, to get involved in politics, which is why so many elected officials themselves are landlords. And they do all of this and write laws all to their own benefit. And this reality is something that is persistent and inherent to capitalism itself. Because when you allow people to acquire such extreme wealth, especially when they don't actually have to work, then it creates this opportunity for people to be engaged in politics and to spend money in politics to have undue influence over the government.